The sun was doing its best to be perfect. It hung high in the bright blue sky over the Los Angeles park, spilling warm, golden light onto everything below. The grass was a vibrant, almost unnatural green, dotted with picnic blankets like a patchwork quilt. You could hear the distant, happy shrieks of children on the swings, the rhythmic thud of a basketball, and the low hum of a dozen different conversations all blending into a single, peaceful sound. It was one of those afternoons that felt like a gift, a small pocket of time where everything was just right. People were relaxed, moving with a slow, easy pace, completely absorbed in their own little worlds of leisure and simple joy. But then, cutting through all that calm was a different kind of energy. It was sharp and jagged, and it belonged to a young man, probably no older than 17, who was walking a path that cut across the main lawn. He was dressed in the kind of clothes that looked expensive but were meant to appear casual, a carefully constructed uniform of cool. His shoes were pristine. His t-shirt had a minimalist logo that was probably more valuable than someone's weekly grocery bill, and his jeans were artfully ripped. He had a phone clutched in one hand, his thumb scrolling furiously, his face twisted in a permanent scowl of irritation. At the other end of a short, worn-out leash was a small dog. The dog was a scruffy little thing, a terrier mix of some kind, with mottled brown and white fur and ears that flopped down at odd angles. It was the kind of dog you'd see in a cartoon, designed to look lovable and a little bit goofy. But there was nothing goofy about its posture. Its body was low to the ground, its tail tucked so tightly between its legs it was almost invisible. It walked not with the curious bouncing trot of a typical dog, but with a hesitant, fearful shuffle, its eyes constantly flicking up at the boy holding its leash, as if checking for danger. It was clear this little creature was living in a state of constant anxiety, and the source of that anxiety was walking right in front of it. As they made their way across the grass, the dog did what dogs do. It caught an interesting scent on the breeze, and for a moment its instincts took over. It stopped, its little nose twitching furiously as it tried to identify the fascinating smell left by another animal. It was a brief, innocent pause, a moment of pure doggy curiosity. But for the boy, it was an unforgivable offense. Without even looking up from his phone, he gave the leash a vicious, sudden jerk. The movement was so harsh and unexpected that the little dog was yanked off its feet. It let out a sharp, surprised yelp and scrambled to get back on its paws, its whole body trembling. It quickly scurried back to the boy's side, pressing itself against his leg as if seeking protection from the very person who had hurt it. The boy didn't even acknowledge the cry. He just kept walking, his face still glued to his screen. A few people noticed. An older couple, sharing a sandwich on a nearby blanket, both stopped chewing and looked over. Their faces softened with concern, and the woman started to say something to her husband. He just shook his head slightly, a silent warning not to get involved. They exchanged a look of sad helplessness and then deliberately turned their attention back to their lunch, pretending they hadn't seen a thing. It's a common scene, that uncomfortable dance of inaction. You see something wrong, something that makes your stomach clench, but the thought of confrontation, of turning a peaceful afternoon into a conflict, is just too much. So you look away and you hope someone else will do something. A young woman pushing a stroller saw the whole thing, too. She had been smiling down at her baby, but her smile vanished when she heard the dog's yelp. She watched as the boy yanked the leash again, this time accompanied by a low, muttered curse. The woman's jaw tightened. She looked at the terrified dog, then at the aggressive posture of the boy, and then down at her own child. A flicker of fear crossed her face. Who knows what someone that angry and unpredictable might do if confronted? She quickened her pace, her eyes fixed straight ahead, pulling the stroller a little closer to her side as she passed them. Creating as much distance as possible, the boy, oblivious or uncaring to the silent judgment of the strangers around him, seemed to be growing more and more agitated. Whatever was happening on his phone was clearly making him angry. He started pacing back and forth in a small, tight circle, and the poor dog was dragged along with him, confused and frightened. Every time the dog tried to stop or change direction, the leash would go tight again, accompanied by another harsh tug. The boy started muttering, not just to himself, but to the dog. "Stupid," he hissed under his breath. "Useless thing. Can't you just stand still?" The words were laced with a venom that was shocking to hear directed at such a small, defenseless animal. The dog just flinched, its ears flattening against its head. It had no idea what it was doing wrong, only that it was always doing something wrong. The park around them continued its happy, noisy business, but it felt like a bubble of misery had formed around this boy and his dog. The contrast was jarring. Laughter from a nearby picnic table seemed to mock the silent suffering of the little animal. The warm sun now felt harsh and unforgiving. The peaceful atmosphere had been poisoned by this one small, cruel drama playing out in public. And still, no one intervened. Everyone was a spectator, hidden behind their own safety and their own fear. The boy finally stopped pacing and stood still, staring down at his phone with an intensity that was almost frightening. The dog, sensing a moment of stillness, cautiously sat down, its thin body trembling slightly. It looked up at the boy with big brown eyes that held a glimmer of hope, a desperate plea for a kind word, a gentle touch, anything that would signal safety. But the boy didn't look down. He was lost in his own world of frustration, and the dog at his feet was nothing more than an annoyance, an inconvenient responsibility that was testing his patience. The little dog let out a soft, almost inaudible whimper, a tiny sound of pure despair that was immediately swallowed by the sounds of the park. It was a cry for help that went completely unheard, a final, quiet moment before the situation was about to get much, much worse. The boy's patience had officially run out. The quiet whimper from the little dog seemed to be the final, tiny push that sent the boy over the edge. It was a sound of pure vulnerability, and to the boy it felt like an accusation. He finally tore his eyes away from his phone, the screen of which now displayed a frustratingly frozen video. The world, for a moment, had refused to bend to his will, and in his mind the small, trembling creature at his feet was the perfect scapegoat for his simmering anger. He glared down at the dog, his face a mask of contempt. The dog, which had just been sitting, now seemed to sense the shift in the air. It tried to press itself even flatter against the ground. A desperate attempt to become invisible, to disappear. The boy took a step closer, his shadow falling over the small animal. "You think this is funny?" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. The dog flinched, a full-body shudder of pure terror. It didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone, the venom, the promise of pain. It let out another soft whine, this one cut short, as if it was too scared to even make a noise. The boy's hands, which had been clenched around his phone, now opened and closed at his sides, his knuckles white. He was like a pot of water that had been boiling for too long, the lid rattling and about to blow off. From their blanket, the older couple watched with a growing sense of horror. The woman had put down her sandwich, her appetite completely gone. Her husband had sat up straighter, his easygoing slouch replaced by a rigid posture of alarm. They were no longer casual observers. They were witnesses to something ugly and wrong. The woman wanted to shout, to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. The boy's anger was so palpable, so volatile, that it felt like a physical barrier. To step into that space felt like stepping into the path of a storm. The boy took another step, and the dog, in its panic, did the only thing it could think to do. It scrambled backward, its paws scrabbling uselessly on the grass. It didn't run away, because the leash was still taut, a constant reminder of its captivity. Instead, it just tried to create a few inches of space, a tiny buffer between itself and the source of its fear. This small act of self-preservation, however, was the final trigger. To the boy, it wasn't fear. It was defiance. It was the dog actively disobeying him, challenging his authority in front of all these people. "Get back here," he yelled, his voice cracking with teenage rage. He gave the leash another savage pull, but the dog, in its terror, had braced itself. It slid a few inches, its paws digging into the dirt, but it refused to come closer. This was it. This was the point of no return. The boy's face contorted with a fury that was frightening to see on someone so young. He dropped the leash. The sudden lack of tension surprised the dog, and for a split second it just stood there, confused and frozen. And then it happened. It wasn't a prolonged, drawn-out movement. It was a flash of ugly, impulsive violence. The boy's leg snapped out, not with the force of a trained fighter, but with the sloppy, uncontrolled rage of a spoiled child having a tantrum. His foot connected with the dog's side. There was a dull, sickening thud, a sound that was completely out of place in the cheerful park. It was the sound of something soft and living being struck by something hard and unforgiving. For a moment, there was silence. The dog seemed to be in shock, its eyes wide with disbelief. Then, a sound tore through the air that made everyone who heard it stop what they were doing. It wasn't a bark or a yelp. It was a high-pitched, piercing cry of pure agony and terror. It was a sound that ripped through the peaceful afternoon and injected a dose of raw, ugly reality into the scene. It was the sound of an innocent being broken. The little dog crumpled to the ground. It didn't get up. It just lay there, whimpering softly, its body curled into a tight ball of pain. A few people who hadn't been paying attention before now turned their heads, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock. A young child pointed, "Mommy, why is that doggy crying?" before being quickly shushed by a horrified parent. The bubble of misery around the boy and his dog had just burst, splashing its cold contents over everyone nearby. The boy stood there for a second, his chest heaving. For a fleeting moment, a look of shock crossed his own face, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. But the look was quickly replaced by a defensive scowl. He looked around, not at the dog, but at the people who were now staring at him. His chin jutted out defiantly, his eyes daring anyone to challenge him. He was trapped, and he knew it. He had done something terrible in public, and his only defense was aggression. But on a nearby bench, a man who had been sitting quietly, observing the world with a gentle, detached interest, had just witnessed the entire exchange. He had seen the escalating tension, the boy's mounting frustration, and the dog's growing fear. When the cry of pain cut through the air, his head lifted slowly, purposefully. His body, which had been relaxed and at ease, underwent a subtle but profound transformation. His spine straightened, his shoulders squared. The distant, thoughtful look in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, unwavering focus. He wasn't looking at the crowd or the general scene anymore. His gaze was locked, with laser-like intensity, on the boy standing over the whimpering dog. He had seen it all, and in that moment the peaceful observer was gone, replaced by something else entirely. The world seemed to hold its breath. The boy's chest was still heaving, his face a twisted mask of defiance and shame. The little dog's whimpers were the only sound, a pathetic counterpoint to the heavy silence that had fallen over the small patch of park. The onlookers, who had been a scattered collection of individuals just moments before, were now a unified audience, their collective gaze fixed on the ugly scene. They were a jury, and they had already reached a verdict. But no one was moving. No one was speaking. The invisible wall of fear and social awkwardness was still holding strong. Then from the bench, a figure began to move. It was the man who had been watching so quietly. He didn't stand up with a sudden jerk or an angry start. His movement was slow, deliberate, and filled with a sense of purpose that was impossible to ignore. He rose to his full height, a simple, fluid motion that seemed to draw all the energy in the area toward him. He wasn't a large man, but in that moment he seemed to fill the space. His shoulders were back, his posture straight and solid. He wasn't just standing up. He was taking a stand. As he took his first step, the crowd's attention shifted from the cowering boy to this new player. People didn't recognize him, not yet. They just saw a man, dressed in a simple jacket and a baseball cap, who was finally doing what they all wished they had the courage to do. He walked with an unhurried pace, each step placed with care. The sounds of the park, the distant laughter, the thud of the basketball seemed to fade away, replaced by the soft crunch of his shoes on the grass. It was like a scene in a movie where the background noise drops out, focusing all attention on the crucial action unfolding in the foreground. The boy, still trying to project an air of tough indifference, noticed the approaching figure. He squared his shoulders, trying to look bigger, more intimidating. "What?" he barked out, his voice cracking slightly. "You got a problem?" It was a bluff. A desperate attempt to regain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of his grasp. The man didn't answer right away. He continued his approach, stopping just a few feet from the boy. He was close enough that the boy could see the calm, steady look in his eyes. There was no anger there, no rage. There was something else, something much more powerful and unsettling. It was a look of profound disappointment, of quiet judgment. The man's gaze flickered down for a split second to the trembling dog on the ground, and when his eyes returned to the boy's face, the disappointment deepened. "Hey," the man said. His voice wasn't loud. It was low and quiet, yet it carried more weight than a shout could ever have. It cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter, silencing the boy's bluster instantly. "This ain't got nothing to do with you," the boy shot back. But his voice lacked its earlier conviction. He was trying to sound tough, but the man's calm demeanor was disarming him, stripping away his anger and leaving only his fear. The man ignored the boy's words. He looked past him, at the small crowd that had formed a semicircle around them. He saw the faces of the older couple, the young mother with her stroller, the others who had stopped to watch. He saw their silent helplessness, and then he looked back at the boy. And he began to speak. "The only thing that little creature did was love you," he said, his voice still soft, but now edged with a steel-like firmness. "That's it. That's all he's ever done. He looks at you and he sees his whole world. He thinks you're everything. And you're using that love. You're using his trust to show everyone here just how weak you are." The words hit the boy like a physical blow. His confident sneer faltered. His face, which had been a mask of defiance, started to crumble. The man wasn't yelling. He was just stating facts, and the truth of them was undeniable. He was reframing the entire story, taking the boy's narrative of a disobedient pet, and replacing it with one of a betrayed innocent. The man took another small step closer. "You think kicking a helpless animal makes you strong?" he asked, his voice dropping even lower, becoming more intimate, more personal. "It doesn't. It's the easiest thing in the world to hurt something that can't fight back. That's not strength. That's the opposite of strength." He paused, letting the words sink in. The park was utterly silent now. Everyone was hanging on his every word. "Real strength," he continued, his eyes locked on the boy's, "is protecting the innocent. It's being kind when you don't have to be. It's having compassion for those who are smaller and weaker than you. That's what makes a person strong. That's what makes a man." The last word hung in the air, a direct and powerful challenge to the boy's fragile teenage ego. The boy was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. All his anger, all his posturing, had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of shame. The man wasn't attacking him. He was dissecting him, laying bare his insecurities for everyone to see. The public humiliation was absolute, and it was far more brutal than any physical fight could have been. The man delivered the final blow. "All you're doing right now," he said, his tone almost sad, "is proving to everyone here that you're a bully. And a coward." The word coward struck the boy with the force of a lightning strike. It was the one thing he couldn't tolerate, the one label he feared most. His face flushed a deep, painful red. He looked at the ground, at the dog, at the faces in the crowd, and everywhere he looked, he saw judgment. He saw pity. He saw contempt. He was completely and utterly exposed. The man didn't wait for a response. He had said what he needed to say. His focus shifted back to the dog, who was still whimpering softly on the grass. He held out his hand, not to the boy, but in a gesture of command. "Give me the leash," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a quiet, undeniable order. "You don't deserve him." Shaking, his hands fumbling with the simple clasp, the boy's fingers struggled with the metal hook. His power was gone. His authority was shattered. Finally, the leash came unclipped. He didn't hand it over. He just dropped it as if it were burning him and turned. He didn't storm off in a final act of defiance. He fled. He walked away quickly, his head down, his shoulders slumped in defeat, disappearing into the park as if he were trying to escape his own shame. The crowd silently parted to let him pass, their eyes following him until he was gone. The leash lay on the grass, a thin, brown snake of surrender. For a moment, nobody moved. The boy's angry energy had been replaced by a vacuum, a heavy silence that settled over the scene. The crowd, which had been a tense, fearful audience, now seemed to exhale all at once. Their shoulders relaxed. The air, which had felt thick with violence, started to clear. The man, however, didn't look at the people. His focus remained entirely on the small, trembling ball of fur on the ground. He didn't immediately reach for the leash. He didn't rush in. He understood that the dog had just been betrayed by the one person it was supposed to trust. Any sudden movement, any loud noise, could be seen as another threat. Instead, he took a slow step back, giving the animal some space. Then, with a gentleness that seemed to come from his very core, he lowered himself to the ground. He didn't just bend over. He sank down onto his haunches, then settled onto his knees in the grass, making himself smaller, less intimidating. He was now at the dog's level. He didn't speak at first. He just waited, his posture open and non-threatening. He kept his eyes soft, looking at the dog without staring directly into its eyes, which a dog can perceive as a challenge. He was just a quiet, still presence in the dog's chaotic world. The little dog was still curled up tight, its whimpers now softer, more like hiccups of fear. Its body was a knot of pain and confusion. It could smell the man, feel his presence, but it didn't know what this new human wanted. After a long moment, the man began to speak. His voice was barely a whisper, a low, soothing rumble that was more vibration than sound. "Hey there," he murmured. "It's okay. You're safe now." The words were simple, but the tone was everything. It was filled with a calm assurance that seemed to seep into the ground and travel up through the dog's paws. He slowly extended one hand, not reaching for the dog, but just placing it on the grass a few inches away, palm up. It was an offering, not a demand. A gesture of peace. The dog's ear twitched. It could hear the gentle voice. It could see the still hand. Slowly, tentatively, it uncurled its body just a little bit. Its head lifted, and its big, brown eyes, still wide with fear, looked at the man. It was a look of profound questioning. Was this more pain? Or was it something else? The man remained perfectly still, letting the dog make the decision. After what felt like an eternity, the dog shuffled forward an inch. Then another. Its nose twitched, sniffing the man's outstretched fingers. The man held his breath, willing the dog to trust him. Finally, a small, rough tongue darted out and gave his fingers a quick, hesitant lick. It was a tiny gesture, but it felt like a monumental breakthrough. The man let out a slow, silent breath. He slowly moved his hand and began to stroke the dog's back, his touch feather-light, tracing the outline of its small frame. He could feel the dog's heart hammering against its ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. He just kept stroking, a steady, rhythmic motion, murmuring soft, nonsensical words of comfort. "Good boy. That's a good boy. You're all right now." Once the dog seemed to calm down a little, its trembling subsiding into occasional shivers, the man shifted his focus. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a simple, unassuming water bottle. He twisted off the cap and poured a small amount of water into the cup of his hand. He held his hand out to the dog, who sniffed it cautiously before lapping up the water with a desperate thirst. It was clear the little thing hadn't had a drink in a while. The man poured more into his hand, letting the dog drink its fill. It was such a simple act, but it was one of pure, selfless care. With the dog's immediate thirst quenched, the man's expression grew more serious. He needed to check for injuries. He ran his hands gently over the dog's sides, feeling for any broken bones or tender spots. The dog flinched when his fingers brushed the area where the kick had landed, letting out a soft yelp. The man's face hardened for a second, a flash of the same anger he had directed at the boy. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a deep, simmering sadness. He knew the dog needed a real doctor. He gently scooped up the dog, holding it securely against his chest. The animal, which had been so terrified of humans just minutes before, now seemed to understand it was in safe hands. It tucked its head under his chin, its body finally relaxing. The man then picked up the discarded leash, more as a symbol than for any practical use. With the dog cradled in one arm, he pulled out his phone with his other hand. He didn't call 911 or the General Animal Control. He scrolled through his contacts and found a number for a local, no-kill animal rescue he knew of. His voice on the phone was calm and clear, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil of the past few minutes. "Hi, yes, I'm calling about an animal in distress," he said. "I'm in the park at the corner of Oak and Elm. I have a small terrier mix here, male, looks to be about a year old. He's been abused. He has a visible injury on his side and he's very frightened." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. "No, I'm not the owner. The owner is gone. I have the dog with me now, and he's calm. I can wait with him until your team arrives." He gave his name, a simple, quiet name that wouldn't mean anything to the person on the phone, and then hung up. He sat down on the grass. Leaning against the trunk of a large oak tree, the dog still nestled in his arms. The small crowd that had gathered was still there, but they had kept their distance, not wanting to intrude on this quiet moment. A few people gave him small, appreciative nods. The older woman from the picnic blanket walked over and handed him a clean napkin from her lunch bag. "For any mess," she said softly, her eyes filled with tears. He thanked her with a warm, genuine smile. The simple human connection felt important. He sat there for what felt like a long time, just stroking the dog's fur and watching the clouds drift by. The park slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The sounds of laughter and play came back, but now they felt different, more precious. The man thought about the boy, not with anger, but with a sense of pity. He wondered what kind of pain someone must be in to inflict it on something so innocent. It was a sad circular thought. But then the dog in his arms let out a soft sigh of contentment, and the man's focus returned to the present. He couldn't fix the boy, but he could help this little creature. And right now, that was more than enough. He was just a man, sitting under a tree, giving a scared dog a moment of peace in a chaotic world, waiting for help to arrive. The quiet wait under the oak tree felt like a long time, but it wasn't. It was just a pocket of stillness in a world that had been moving too fast. The man continued to stroke the dog's fur, a steady, rhythmic motion that was as calming for him as it was for the animal. The dog, for its part, had stopped shivering. It seemed to have accepted this new reality, a reality where it was held gently, spoken to softly, and was, for the first time in a long time, completely safe. Its eyes were half closed and its breathing was deep and even. It was almost asleep. Then a new sound entered the peaceful bubble. It was the distant, growing wail of a siren, but it wasn't a police car or an ambulance. It was a different kind of siren, one that sounded more hopeful. A moment later, a white van with colorful paw prints painted on the side turned into the park entrance and drove slowly across the grass toward them. The words City Animal Rescue were written in a friendly, rounded font on the side. The vehicle stopped a short distance away, and two people, a woman and a man, both dressed in matching blue uniforms, got out. They moved with a quiet efficiency, carrying a small animal crate and a medical kit. They were professionals, and their arrival signaled that the man's watch was over. He stood up slowly, careful not to disturb the dog in his arms. The female rescuer approached him first, her expression a mixture of professional concern and gentle warmth. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. "I'm the one you spoke to on the phone. Thank you for calling us." The man just nodded. "He's a good boy," he said, his voice low. "He's just been through a lot. He's sore on his left side, right here." He gently indicated the spot with his free hand. The rescuer knelt down, getting on the dog's level. "Hey there, little guy," she cooed, extending a hand for the dog to sniff. The dog tensed for a second, its head popping up from the man's shoulder, but then it seemed to remember the gentle touch it had just experienced. It sniffed her hand cautiously. The man spoke to the dog again, a quiet murmur of reassurance. "It's okay. They're here to help you." The handover was a delicate process. The man didn't just pass the dog over like a package. He knelt down beside the rescuer, still holding the dog securely. He let the animal get used to the new person's scent and presence. He spoke to it the whole time, his voice a steady, comforting anchor in a sea of new experiences. "You're going to be okay now," he whispered. "They're going to take you to a doctor and you're going to get all better. And then you're going to find a real home, a home where you'll be safe and loved forever." The dog seemed to understand, or at least it understood the tone. It licked the man's hand one last time, a final, grateful kiss, before allowing the female rescuer to gently take it from his arms. She wrapped it in a soft, colorful blanket and placed it carefully inside the carrier. The dog let out one small whimper, but then settled down. While the female rescuer attended to the dog, the male rescuer spoke with the man. He was taking down notes on a clipboard. "We have a description of the young man," he said. "We'll be filing a full report with animal control and the police. This kind of thing can't be ignored." The man just nodded again. He wasn't interested in talking about the boy. His focus was on the dog's future. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He took out a credit card and handed it to the rescuer. "I'd like to cover all of his medical expenses," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Whatever he needs. Surgery, medicine, physical therapy, whatever it takes. And I'd like to make a donation to your organization as well, to help other animals like him." The rescuer looked a bit surprised, but he nodded professionally. "Of course, sir. That's incredibly generous. We'll make sure every penny goes to his care." The man completed the transaction on a portable card reader the rescuer had. He didn't ask for a receipt. He didn't make a big deal out of it. It was just a practical step to ensure a good outcome. Once it was done, he put his wallet away. His part in this drama seemingly finished as the rescuers carried the crate toward the van. A few people from the small crowd who had remained finally approached the man. It was the older couple from the picnic blanket. The woman's eyes were red-rimmed, but she was smiling. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for what you did. We were all just watching. We should have done something." The man looked at her, and his expression was kind, without a hint of judgment. "You're here now," he said simply. "That's what matters." He gave them a small, warm smile, a gesture that seemed to say everything was going to be all right. The young woman with the stroller came over too, her baby sleeping peacefully inside. "That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen," she said. "The way you spoke to that boy, it was powerful." The man's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more thoughtful look. "He's just a kid," he said, his voice low. "I hope he learns from this. I really do." With a final nod to the small group of people, he turned and walked away, pulling his baseball cap down a little lower. He didn't look back. He just disappeared into the park, becoming just another person enjoying the afternoon, as if the entire incident had never happened, but it had happened, and someone had recorded it. By that evening, a shaky, vertical video of the confrontation was all over the internet. The title was something sensational, like "Mystery Man Destroys Cruel Teen with Just a Few Words." The video started just as the boy kicked the dog. It captured the man's calm approach, the quiet, devastating power of his words, and the boy's ultimate shame in the flight. It showed him gently comforting the dog and waiting with it until help arrived. People online quickly recognized the familiar face under the baseball cap. The comments section exploded. But the narrative wasn't just Keanu Reeves saves a dog. It was about how he did it. People analyzed his words, his tone, his body language. They talked about the brutal response mentioned in so many headlines. It wasn't brutal because it was violent. It was brutal because it was the truth. It was a calm, public, and unflinching deconstruction of cruelty. He didn't fight anger with anger. He fought it with a profound sense of morality and compassion, leaving the abuser with no defense. He showed the world that true strength isn't about physical power. It's about the courage to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. The story of the little dog, now nicknamed Lucky by the rescue staff, became a beacon of hope. The rescue organization posted updates. Lucky had a cracked rib but was otherwise in good health. He was receiving the best medical care, paid for by a generous anonymous donor. He was already showing his sweet, playful personality. He would be ready for adoption soon, and there was already a long list of people wanting to give him the loving home he deserved. The video of the incident became a teaching moment, shared in schools and discussed on talk shows. It was a reminder that in a world full of noise and anger, a quiet act of compassion, a few well-chosen words of truth can be the most powerful force of all. The man in the park didn't want fame or praise. He just saw a wrong and tried to make it right. And in doing so, he didn't just save one small dog. He reminded millions of people what it means to be human.